On what was meant to be a blessed day for their daughter's betrothal, a meticulously crafted stage of lies unfurled. A father's relentless pursuit of truth would unravel a vast conspiracy that threatened to completely overturn his daughter's life. The private room in a high-end Chinese restaurant housed within a beautifully conserved shophouse was so hushed that every sound seemed to be absorbed into a vacuum. Intricately carved wooden panels depicting scenes of old Singapore passively adorn the space, while on the expensive rosewood table, a fragrant double-boiled abalone soup, still steaming, had just been served. Yet even that warmth was chilled by the icy tension that permeated the air between the two families seated opposite each other. The air was as heavy as lead, and with every breath, Chloe Tan felt a crushing pressure on her chest, a cold sweat trickling down her spine. She couldn't lift her head. Her gaze was fixed on her hands, neatly clasped in her lap, yet she could feel them subtly trembling. It was as if all the world's accusations and contempt were raining down on her, scoffing at every moment of the tiny life growing inside her. The voice of the woman who was to be her future mother-in-law was sharp as shards of ice. Mrs. Eleanor Lim scanned Chloe's parents once, then fixed her gaze on Chloe with a look that suggested she was an insect. "It's truly deplorable that a woman from this kind of family would dare to enter our family." Every syllable of her words bristled with thorns, and each word was a dagger piercing Chloe's heart. Her face burned with humiliation, yet she could do nothing but bite her lip. A crushing guilt like iron chains shackled her whole body, whispering that she was the cause of all this. Beside her, Chloe's mother, Mrs. Sharon Tan, gently held her daughter's trembling hand. The subtle currents of anger and sorrow conveyed through that touch only made Chloe feel more wretched. Her father, Mr. Daniel Tan, sat with a stern expression, his lips tightly sealed, but his bloodshot eyes mirrored the ominous calm before a storm. Marcus Lim, the prospective son-in-law, fidgeted restlessly, repeatedly moistening his dry lips. His eyes wandered aimlessly, like someone unsure where to place his gaze between Chloe and his parents. More embarrassment and anxiety, rather than apology, were discernible in his eyes. The realization that he was a helpless figure, powerless to navigate this situation, filled Chloe with despair. Was the love she had believed in truly this fragile? She feared the child within her would sense its father's cowardice. Mr. Richard Lim, chairman of JKL Holdings and Marcus's father, sat with his arms crossed, barely concealing a satisfied smirk. Far from restraining his wife's verbal assault, he seemed to be egging her on. His eyes blatantly revealed that he had been searching for an excuse to break off this engagement from the very beginning. Premarital pregnancy for him was not a reason to admonish his son, but the perfect weapon to bring down the opposing party. "It might be my fault for not raising my son well, but fundamentally a leopard never changes its spots. If all he learned was such reckless behavior, how can I blame a woman who acts so carelessly?" He directed his words at Chloe's parents, but the cutting edge was aimed squarely at Chloe. The humiliation extended beyond Chloe becoming an attack on her parents and their entire family. Just as Chloe's father was about to open his mouth, the sliding door of the private room was roughly thrown open. All eyes snapped towards the entrance. Standing there was an unfamiliar woman, neatly dressed, but with an undeniably anxious expression. She paused for a moment to catch her breath, then slowly scanned the faces in the room. Her gaze finally settled on Marcus. "Mr. Marcus Lim, I never imagined such an important discussion would be taking place here." The woman's voice made the air in the room turn even colder. Marcus's face turned ashen. A flicker of dismay crossed Miss and Mrs. Lim's faces, but it was momentary. Mr. Richard Lim's eyes began to gleam shrewdly. He instinctively sensed that this could be yet another opportunity. "Who are you barging in like this?" Chloe's father asked in a low voice. The woman, without tearing her gaze from Marcus, replied, "I am Mr. Marcus Lim's former girlfriend, and I came because there's something I simply cannot let pass." She slowly stepped into the room. Her stride was confident, yet her fingertips trembled subtly. She stopped before the table and briefly looked at Chloe. Her eyes held a mixture of pity, contempt, and an indefinable sense of superiority. "It seems this lady here has also been wronged just like me." Then she dropped a bombshell. "In fact, this man also had a premarital pregnancy issue with me." A sudden silence fell over the room. Even the steam rising from the abalone soup seemed to freeze. Chloe doubted her own ears. She couldn't discern if the words she had just heard were reality or part of a terrible nightmare. Slowly, she lifted her head and looked at Marcus. Marcus was deathly pale, his head bowed, cold sweat pouring down his face. His silence was a more definite affirmation than any excuse. Chloe's parents were speechless with shock. The humiliation their daughter had endured was already enough to make their blood boil. But now, with the ugly past of their prospective son-in-law exposed, their minds went utterly blank. Chloe's mother in particular began to tremble violently, clutching her daughter's hand tighter. However, the reaction from the prospective in-laws was entirely the opposite. Mr. Richard Lim, as if he had been waiting for this, clapped his knee. "See, what did I tell you?" he nodded, shouting triumphantly at Chloe's parents. "This is exactly why we opposed this marriage. There's no changing a leopard's spots. He was rotten from the start. And that girl who followed him around is just the same." All arrows were now aimed back at Chloe and Marcus. But his words weren't filled with genuine anger at his son. Rather, they contained the glee of someone perfectly steering the situation to their advantage. His wife was no different. She sighed dramatically, declaring, "Oh, how dreadful. What kind of family are we to suffer such turmoil because of children like these?" Their hypocritical display made Chloe feel nauseous. "No, it's not true, Father, Mother. What this woman is saying isn't true." Marcus belatedly waved his hands in denial, but his voice was severely trembling and his eyes darted nervously. His excuses failed to convince anyone. "Not true," the unfamiliar woman scoffed. She opened her small handbag and pulled out several photographs and a smartphone. "Can you say this isn't true?" She scattered a few photos onto the table. The pictures showed Marcus and the woman affectionately close, smiling against what looked like holiday backdrops. Then she thrust her smartphone screen towards Mr. and Mrs. Lim. The screen was filled with messages seemingly exchanged between the two of them. Phrases like, "What about our baby, and I'll take responsibility, don't worry," were clearly visible. Still denying it, Mr. Marcus Lim. The woman's voice was filled with triumph. Mr. and Mrs. Lim pretended to scold their son, yelling, "You useless, good for nothing, an irresponsible human being," but satisfied smiles spread across their lips. Now they had a perfect justification to break off the marriage, and all the blame could be shifted onto their son and Chloe. They were utterly delighted with the situation. This was their chance to finally sever this troublesome connection, this unsuitable link with a family beneath their status. While everyone was focused on Marcus and the woman's past and Chloe's miserable predicament, only one person was seeing something else. It was Chloe's father, Mr. Daniel Tan. From the outset, he had observed the situation with the sharp eyes of an investigator. Despite being engulfed in anger and shock, he couldn't shake off a sense of unnaturalness, as if witnessing a poorly staged play. The actors were performing their roles faithfully, but their acting felt clumsy. His gaze shifted to the unfamiliar woman, Jasmine. Her manner of speaking, confident at first, but subtly relaxing with a hint of relief as she pressured Marcus and as Mr. and Mrs. Lim began to side with her, and the evidence, she presented the photos. At first glance, they looked like typical pictures of a couple, but to his eyes, accustomed to seeing countless forged pieces of evidence over the years, their crudeness was evident. The direction of light on the two faces in the photos was subtly different, and some of the boundary lines between the background and the figures felt unnatural. The messages were the same. The flow of conversation was too contrived, like a script intentionally created to be shown to someone. And crucially, Mr. and Mrs. Lim's reaction. Their son's ugly past was revealed, yet he detected not disappointment or anger, but relief and satisfaction. They pretended to scold their son, but their eyes were enjoying the spectacle. All these pieces began to fit together in Mr. Daniel Tan's mind. This was not an accidental occurrence. This was a premeditated trap. At that moment, as the woman assured of her victory looked down at Chloe, her eyes met Mr. Daniel Tan's. For a fleeting instant, the woman showed a flicker of confusion and averted her gaze. Mr. Tan did not miss that momentary tremor. He slowly rose to his feet. At his movement, all the noise in the room ceased. His presence commanded the entire space. He appeared as an ordinary middle-aged man, yet he exuded the aura of a finely sharpened sword. He took a step towards the woman. His eyes were no longer the gentle gaze he had given to his prospective in-laws. They were the cold, relentless eyes of an investigator piercing through lies to uncover the truth. Mr. Tan, in a low but resolute voice that everyone in the room could hear, asked, "Who put you up to this?" Instantly, the woman's face froze, turning stark white. Her pupils quivered violently and her lips trembled. He watched as all her confidence and composure shattered into pieces with that single question. It was then that others in the room began to sense an unusual undercurrent in the situation. An unexpected variable had emerged in what had seemed like a perfectly unfolding scenario of ruin. Even Chloe, deep in shock and sorrow, lifted her head to look at her father. His voice, filled with conviction, cast a small spark of hope into her. Perhaps, just perhaps, none of this was true. Miss Daniel Tan's question was like a stone cast onto a frozen lake. Ripples spread across the surface that had been calm, or that they had wanted to believe was calm. The woman's name was Jasmine Wong. She instinctively knew that the question was aimed directly at her, even though her name hadn't been called. She felt as if her heart had plummeted to her feet. Cold sweat poured down her entire body, soaking her expensive blouse. The lines she had practiced over and over, the countless vows she had made to herself to remain calm in any situation, were crumbling like a sandcastle before the cold gaze of Chloe's father. What do you mean?" Jasmine barely managed to utter, but her voice was thin and trembled like a goat's. She avoided his gaze, aimlessly fiddling with the photographs on the table. Her actions only amplified her anxiety. "You don't know." Mr. Daniel Tan's voice dropped even lower. He kept his eyes fixed on Jasmine, pressing her like a seasoned detective in an interrogation room. "From the moment you entered your walk, your gaze, your tone of voice, everything was unnatural, like someone who had memorized a script. Especially the subtle sense of relief I saw in your expression when you were pressuring Mr. Marcus Lim, and when his parents began to side with you. It was like the look of someone who had successfully completed a difficult task." His analysis, like a sharp scalpel, dissected Jasmine's fabricated performance. Jasmine's lips were sealed, but she couldn't utter a single word. Her mind went blank. This situation hadn't been in the script. She had never imagined that the opposing father would be so acutely perceptive. She had simply assumed he would be a naive and powerless victim's family, too overwhelmed by shock and grief to make rational judgments. Miss Daniel Tan did not stop. He picked up one of the photographs from the table, a picture of Marcus and Jasmine affectionately posed at a beach. This photograph, plausible at a glance, is crude upon closer inspection. The direction of the shadows on their faces is different. One person is lit by the late afternoon sun, while the other is in noon sunlight. It's a composite image, and quite poorly done, it seems. At his observation, Mr. Richard Lim's face instantly stiffened. He glared at Mr. Tan and shouted, "What kind of nonsense is this? Do you have any proof that women's words are lies? Isn't this just a ploy to nitpick and somehow salvage the situation now that everything's already over?" His voice was loud, but it was tinged with clear anxiety. Mr. Tan merely glanced at Mr. Lim, then fixed his gaze back on Jasmine. His persistence, like a snake, began to constrict Jasmine's throat. "And the messages you showed, the conversation is too smooth, too perfect." It was like a script. Real human conversations aren't so perfectly structured from start to finish. There are typos, unnecessary jokes mixed in, and emotional fluctuations are usually apparent. But the conversation you presented was composed solely for the purpose of proving the narrative that we were troubled lovers with a past pregnancy issue. It's a glaring case of evidence tampering. Chloe's mother, Mrs. Sharon Tan, gradually emerged from her shock as she listened to her husband's words. She looked at Jasmine with trembling eyes. At first, she had thought of her as just another woman who had ruined her daughter's life, but listening to her husband, every action of the woman now seemed suspicious. She gripped Chloe's hand even tighter. Chloe, too, watched her father with a confused gaze. She had always thought of her father as just an ordinary office worker, a family man. But now, her father's demeanor was unfamiliar. Where did this keen discernment and cool composure that seemed to see through everything come from? As the situation took an unexpected turn, Mr. and Mrs. Lim were the most flustered. They had regarded Mr. Daniel Tan as merely a manager at a small to medium enterprise, inwardly dismissing and despising him as an unsuitable in-law. But now his presence completely defied their expectations. "Excuse me, sir, are you writing a novel, Mrs.?" Eleanor Lim shrieked sharply. "Our son has ruined your daughter's life, and now you're trying to muddle the waters with false deductions." But her voice, too, carried a hint of unease. Mr. Tan looked at her outburst with a dismissive air. "Whether my daughter's life is ruined or not is for me to judge. It's certainly not your concern. He turned back towards Jasmine. Now I'll ask again. Who put you up to this, Mr. Richard Lim or Mrs. Eleanor Lim sitting there? Or is there another actor behind you? Under his relentless pressure, tears began to well up in Jasmine's eyes. She was like a cornered rat. If she collapsed here, everything would be over. The promised money, the penalty clauses, all the problems weighing down her life would crash upon her. No, it's true. It's all true. I tell you, Jasmine burst into tears and slumped to the floor. It was the typical posture of a helpless victim, a tactic to evoke sympathy and overcome the crisis. But it had no effect on Mr. Daniel Tan. Are those tears also an act? Your acting isn't very good. People who are truly wronged don't cry so calculatingly. Just then, Chloe, who had remained silent, spoke. Her voice was soft, but the power it held was enough to command everyone's attention in the room. Marcus. Chloe called Marcus's name for the first time. Marcus flinched and lifted his head. Chloe looked directly at him, her face pale but her gaze unwavering. Marcus, tell me, who is this woman? Was it really like that between you two? Chloe's question was not merely a request for confirmation. It was a final chance. It was an unspoken plea, suggesting that if he told the truth now, even if she couldn't forgive everything, she would at least retain a minimum of human compassion. She wanted to believe that he was speaking lies due to his parents' pressure, that his true feelings weren't that. It was the last flicker of hope born from the faint vestiges of love. Marcus wavered between Chloe's gaze and the cold, unforgiving eyes of his parents sitting opposite. His lips opened and closed several times. Beads of sweat trickled down his chin. It was the most important choice of his life. Mr. Richard Lim cleared his throat softly, a clear warning to his son. Marcus's eyes darted frantically. He eventually avoided Chloe's gaze and dropped his head. I'm sorry, Chloe. It's all true. His answer was like the sound of a hammer shattering Chloe's last hope into a million pieces. All shudders came down on Chloe's face. The color drained, her expression vanished. Her eyes became as empty as a bottomless abyss. Love, betrayal, despair, and resignation, all these emotions swept over her in an instant. Right, Chloe murmured softly. So that's how it was. At her reaction, Marcus seemed to feel a sense of relief. He thought he had overcome the most difficult hurdle. Triumphant smiles reappeared on Mr. and Mrs. Lim's faces. Now, everything was over. This tiresome engagement, this marriage, and the issue of the baby, all would be neatly resolved. But they had greatly underestimated Mr. Daniel Tan. He had his last chance, and he threw it away. Mr. Daniel Tan's voice was as cold as ice. He no longer questioned Jasmine. His target had shifted. He took out his smartphone and made a call. It was a short conversation. It's me. Come to the address I'm sending you now. Bring Senior Inspector Kumar. No, it's not official. A personal request. You'll see when you get here. After ending the call, Mr. Daniel Tan calmly sat back in his seat. Then, with an unruffled demeanor, he took a sip of water. His actions were so composed and relaxed that they ironically made the onlookers uneasy. Guests will arrive soon. Until then, it would be best for everyone not to move an inch from their seats. His words were not a threat. They were closer to a statement of fact. Mr. Richard Lim shouted, annoyed. Are you threatening us? Why should we listen to you? Our business here is done. We're leaving. As Mr. Lim tried to stand, Mr. Daniel Tan said in a low voice, Miss Richard Lim, share price manipulation accounting fraud slush funds. Don't these words sound rather familiar? About 10 years ago, I handled a case related to these, and your name kept cropping up. You always managed to slip away due to insufficient evidence, but Mr. Richard Lim's face was filled with horror. He froze in the very posture he had taken to stand up. Mrs. Eleanor Lim, equally stunned, looked at her husband. Who are you really? Mr. Tan smiled faintly. Just an ordinary father who loves his daughter. But I simply have a conviction. I never forgive anyone who hurts my daughter. Along with his words, the sound of several footsteps began to echo from outside the private room. The footsteps grew steadily closer. Jasmine trembled like a leaf, and the color drained from Mr. and Mrs. Lim's faces. Marcus, terrified and unable to imagine what would happen next, remained rigid. Only Chloe stared blankly into space. Her world had already collapsed, but from her father's unfamiliar demeanor, a tiny spark of something, a desire for vengeance, began to flicker anew. The door to the private room opened again. This time it did not burst open roughly. It opened slowly and heavily with a respectful but undeniable sense of foreboding. Two middle-aged men stood at the entrance. One was a burly man with sharp eyes whose presence alone hinted at the kind of work he did without needing words. The other had a more amiable expression, but his gaze was unusually keen. They scanned the tense atmosphere of the room once, then gave a slight bow to Mr. Daniel Tan. "Senior, long time no see. What brings you here?" The man with the sharp features, Senior Inspector Kumar, greeted Mr. Tan. The moment he addressed Mr. Tan as Senior, Mr. Richard Lim's face turned ashen. He began to vaguely guess Miss Tan's true identity. He was no mere middle manager from a small company. There was something in his past that Mr. Lim did not know. "Inspector Kumar, sorry to trouble you when you're busy." "And this gentleman?" Mr. Tan asked, looking at the man next to Senior Inspector Kumar. "Ah, he's my junior Sergeant Lee. We were just about to grab dinner as we're off duty today." Senior Inspector Kumar's reply made it clear that they were here unofficially, yet their very presence completely overturned the power dynamics in the room. Mr. and Mrs. Lim, who had been aggressively cornering Chloe's family moments earlier, now sat as if on pins and needles, unable to conceal their unease. Mr. Daniel Tan rose from his seat and approached Senior Inspector Kumar. He whispered a few words to him. As Senior Inspector Kumar listened to Mr. Tan's words, he alternately glanced at Jasmine and Mr. and Mrs. Lim. His gaze grew progressively colder. A veteran detective's instinct had kicked in. He immediately recognized that what was unfolding here was not a simple domestic dispute or family conflict. "Understood, Senior. I have a rough grasp of the situation." Senior Inspector Kumar nodded, then first approached Jasmine, who was still slumped on the floor weeping. He knelt down to meet her eye level. His voice was surprisingly gentle, yet that gentleness concealed a sharp acumen for dissecting the human psyche. "What's your name, miss? You seem very shaken, but let's calm down and talk. Nothing will be solved by just crying like this." Jasmine lifted her head and looked at Senior Inspector Kumar. "Police." She instinctively knew. Realizing that things were escalating irreversibly, she began to cry even more intensely. I don't know anything. I'm just being wronged. We'll listen to all your grievances. But you must tell us the truth. If you lie, things could get even harder for you later." You know that while Senior Inspector Kumar spoke coaxingly, Sergeant Lee went and stood next to Mr. and Mrs. Lim. He said nothing. He simply stood with his arms crossed, looking down at them. But his unspoken pressure was suffocating Mr. and Mrs. Lim. Mr. Richard Lim decided he couldn't simply let this happen. He tried to compose himself and raised his voice. "What is this insolence? Are you police officers? How dare you interfere in a private family matter without a warrant? If you don't leave immediately, I will file a formal complaint with your superiors." Sergeant Lee let out a small laugh at his outburst. "Mr. Richard Lim, I presume. We haven't done anything yet. We're just standing here. Why are you reacting so sensitively, sir? Are you perhaps feeling guilty about something?" Sergeant Lee's smooth, subtly mocking retort left Mr. Lim speechless. He was accustomed to manipulating people using the law and power, but he was not used to facing direct pressure like this on the ground. His world was one where money could solve everything, not one where he directly clashed with those who enforced the law itself. Just then, Mr. Daniel Tan spoke again. His voice quieted all the commotion in the room. "Mr. Richard Lim, do you still not realize what you've done? You didn't just dislike a prospective daughter-in-law and try to break off an engagement. You trampled on a person's dignity, defamed her, and even fabricated evidence to frame an innocent person as a criminal. This alone is enough for you to face the judgment of the law. But there's no evidence," Miss Lim shouted defiantly. "Evidence?" Mr. Tan scoffed. "We can make evidence now." He gestured to Senior Inspector Kumar. Senior Inspector Kumar lightly tapped Jasmine's shoulder and said, "Miss, think carefully. If you tell the truth now, there might be room for leniency. But if you persist in lying, we'll have no choice but to charge you as an accomplice in evidence tampering and malicious prosecution. They might have money and powerful lawyers to escape, but what do you think will happen to you? You'll be cut loose in an instant. If you don't want your life to end here, you'd better speak now." Senior Inspector Kumar's words broke Jasmine's last line of defense. Money. That was why she had thrown herself into this dangerous charade. But she couldn't go to prison for money. She wiped her tears with trembling hands and glared at Mr. and Mrs. Lim with resentful eyes. Their gazes warned her not to say anything unnecessary. But Jasmine could no longer remain their puppet. I just did, as I was told. At last, the first fragment of truth burst from Jasmine's lips. At that moment, Mr. and Mrs. Lim's faces contorted. What is that woman saying? Mrs. Eleanor Lim shrieked, but Senior Inspector Kumar raised a hand to stop her words. Quiet, madam. It's this young lady's turn to speak now. Jasmine stammered, continuing her story. A man contacted me. He offered me a large sum of money to act. To pretend to be Mr. Marcus Lim's old girlfriend, to act as if we broke up over a pregnancy issue. Who was this man? Senior Inspector Kumar pressed insistently. I don't know. He never told me his name. He just said he was from a fixer agency. How did you receive the money? It was deposited into my bank account. I received a portion as a down payment, and the rest was to be paid after the job was successfully completed. Can we check your bank transaction history right now? Jasmine nodded. She took out her smartphone from her bag and handed it to Senior Inspector Kumar. Senior Inspector Kumar skillfully operated the smartphone, opened the internet banking app, and confirmed a large sum of money had been deposited a few days earlier. He showed the screen to Sergeant Lee. Sergeant Lee nodded and began to quickly search for something on his own smartphone. The depositor's name was likely a nominee account, but tracing that account would eventually reveal the source of the money. As everything came to light, Marcus, looking utterly distraught, slumped to the floor. He couldn't believe his parents had orchestrated such a terrible scheme. Or perhaps he had vaguely suspected it all along. When his parents, who had initially opposed the marriage, suddenly agreed to the engagement dinner, and when his father had given him a meaningful smile that morning, saying, "Everything will be settled today," he had felt an ominous premonition. But he had deliberately ignored it. He lacked the courage to defy his parents. And living within the comfortable confines his parents had created was easier than shouldering responsibility for Chloe and the baby. His cowardice ultimately left an indelible scar on Chloe. Chloe quietly closed her eyes. No tears flowed. It felt as though all her tears had already dried up. She completely erased even the last lingering attachment to Marcus. Greater than betrayal was her disillusionment with humanity. How could a family, for their own benefit, so meticulously and cruelly destroy another person's life? With the situation completely reversed, Mr. Daniel Tan returned to his seat. He said nothing more. His role was finished. What remained was the enforcement of the law and the passage of time. He quietly put his arm around his daughter's shoulder. Chloe leaned into her father's embrace. In her father's solid embrace, she felt a sense of stability she hadn't experienced in a very long time. It was the moment she profoundly realized who the only person was who would truly protect her in this terrible hell. Mr. Richard Lim, as if he no longer had the energy to make excuses, roughly loosened his tie and slumped onto his chair. His empire, his reputation, and prestige, which he had dedicated his life to building, were crumbling pathetically at the hands of a man he had dismissed as insignificant. He glared at Mr. Tan. His eyes contained a mixture of anger, awe, and fear. "Who are you, really?" Mr. Lim's voice cracked weakly. Mr. Tan looked directly at him and answered softly, "Someone who over 10 years ago dedicated his youth to catching people like you. Though I am an ordinary office worker, now you are the one who has awakened the monster that lay dormant within me." Along with his words, Sergeant Lee approached Mr. Lim and said, "Mr. Richard Lim, Mrs. Eleanor Lim, and Mr. Marcus Lim, based on Miss Jasmine Wong's testimony and the evidence, we are requesting your voluntary attendance for questioning on charges of malicious prosecution and instigating defamation. You may appoint a lawyer and exercise your right to remain silent." As the official procedure began, the private room in the Chinese restaurant instantly transformed into an interrogation room. The lavish engagement dinner had become the scene of a family's ugly crime. Chloe watched all this quietly embraced by her father. She felt a faint movement, the first stirrings of the tiny life within her. It was like a signal, announcing a new beginning. Painful and terrible, though it was only after enduring all these trials was she finally preparing to become a true adult. As the door to the private room closed, a terrible wreckage remained in the wake of the storm that had swept through. The expensive dishes lay untouched and cold, and scattered fragments of photographs littered the floor like a script from the ugly drama that had just unfolded. After the Lim family and Jasmine had followed the police officers out, a heavy silence hung in the room. Mr. Daniel Tan, his wife Mrs. Sharon Tan and their daughter Chloe sat as if they were the only ones left in the world, unable to speak for a long while. Mrs. Sharon Tan began to sob quietly. Suppressed emotions burst forth all at once. The humiliation and pain her daughter had endured, the cruelty of the people they had believed to be their prospective in-laws, and even her husband's unfamiliar side, everything was an overwhelming shock to her. She held Chloe's hand and choked out, "My daughter, my poor daughter, what are we to do? To suffer such disgrace?" Chloe looked at her mother with tearless, empty eyes. She was gripped by a vast emptiness rather than sorrow. Everything she had believed to be love was a lie, and every moment she had dreamed of a happy future was a deception. The child in her womb now felt not like a blessing but like the evidence of an indelible wound. She blamed her own foolishness. She resented herself for not having recognized Marcus Lim's cowardice and his family's arrogance earlier. Mr. Daniel Tan silently comforted his wife, patting her shoulder. He knew that no words of consolation would reach his wife and daughter right now. Time was needed. The only thing he could do was to quietly stay by their side until the wounds healed and the poison of betrayal receded. He rose from his seat and walked towards the window. Outside, darkness had already fallen thickly, and the city lights twinkled indifferently. How many ugly desires and lies lay hidden behind that seemingly peaceful scenery? He felt as though he was facing the raw truth of human nature again after more than 10 years. A prosecutor, that was his past. In his youth, he had been a passionate prosecutor who could not tolerate injustice. Driven by a single conviction to eradicate corruption and uphold justice, he had dedicated himself day and night to cases. He particularly excelled at pursuing economic criminals, especially those like Mr. Richard Lim, who cleverly circumvented the law using money and power. Several times he had almost caught Mr. Lim, but he always slipped away like an eel. Behind him was the formidable protection of a massive law firm and political connections. Eventually, Mr. Daniel Tan ran into a huge wall. Amidst threats and coaxing that continued fighting would endanger not only himself, but also his family, he ultimately took off his prosecutor's robes. Along with a deep sense of frustration that justice alone could not change the world. After that, he lived as an ordinary office worker, dedicating himself to his family. He lived as if he had forgotten the past or tried to forget it, finding happiness in the ordinary life of watching his daughter Chloe grow up. But deep within him, a sharp blade still lay dormant. Today, the Lim family had provoked that blade by hurting Mr. Daniel Tan's most precious possession, his daughter. They had reawakened his past, his true nature. Honey Mrs. Sharon Tan called her husband in a trembling voice. "Those people just now, who were they, and how did you know about Mr. Lim's illegal activities?" Mr. Tan slowly turned around. He had never discussed his past in detail with his wife and daughter. He had only told them that he had briefly worked in a different field before becoming an ordinary office worker. He instinctively knew that the time had come to speak. "I'm sorry, honey Chloe. There was something Father never fully told you." He sat back down and began to open the door to his tightly sealed past. The fact that he had been a prosecutor, that he had pursued people like Mr. Richard Lim, and how he had ultimately been frustrated and retreated in the face of reality's wall. His confession was quiet, but it was tinged with deep regret and anger. Mrs. Sharon Tan and Chloe listened to her husband's, her father's story in shock. Chloe finally felt all the pieces fall into place. Her father's keen deductive reasoning and charisma at the engagement dinner and his ability to command police officers all were connected to his past. She was proud of her father, yet at the same time her heart ached for the pain and frustration he must have endured. "So Mr. Lim didn't recognize you, but you recognized him first," Dad Chloe said softly. "Yes. When the engagement date was set and I heard the prospective in-law's name was Richard Lim, I dismissed it. I thought it must be a namesake. But today, seeing his face in person, I was sure. He hadn't changed one bit from 10 years ago. That arrogance, that condescending gaze." Mr. Daniel Tan clenched his fist tightly. "If I hadn't resigned as a prosecutor, a man like him wouldn't be so brazenly swaggering around. I'm sorry that my weakness ultimately ended up hurting my daughter." "No," Dad Chloe shook her head. "It's not your fault. They are the bad ones. You protected me, didn't you? If you hadn't been here today, I would have been completely helpless." Mrs. Sharon Tan also nodded at Chloe's words. She took her husband's hand. That's right, dear. Thanks to you, our daughter wasn't hurt anymore. How hard it must have been for you, how heavy a burden you've carried alone all this time. The family embraced each other. Unlike the ugly events that had unfolded outside their space, was filled with mutual understanding and love. The ordeal, instead of breaking them, had bound them even more tightly together. After a long moment, Mr. Daniel Tan spoke. It begins now. His voice carried unwavering resolve. Mrs. Sharon, Tan, and Chloe looked at him. Richard Lim is not the kind of man to be easily defeated by this. He'll desperately try to evade the law. He'll hire the best lawyers, and he might even try all sorts of persuasion and threats against us. Then what should we do, Mrs. Sharon Tan asked with a worried voice. We fight. Mr. Daniel Tan's eyes flashed. This time, I will absolutely not back down. It's not just about punishing them. We must expose all the crimes they've committed to the world and completely tear down the castle of lies they've built. That is the only way to restore my daughter's honor, and it is how I will finish what I couldn't in the past. His voice was no longer that of an ordinary family man. It was like the roar of a beast that had long been dormant. He was not merely seeking revenge for his daughter. He had resolved to confront his past and the justice he had once turned away from. Chloe looked at her father, and she too solidified her resolve within her heart. She would no longer remain a weak, weeping victim. This fight was not just her father's alone. It was a battle for her own life, and the life of the child within her. She had to become strong. Dad, I'll fight with you. Chloe's voice did not tremble. It was imbued with a newfound strength she hadn't possessed before. For me and for my child, I will no longer run away. I will clearly testify with my own voice what those people did to me. Mr. Daniel Tan looked into his daughter's eyes. In those eyes, he saw hope, a strong vitality blossoming from the ashes of despair. He stroked his daughter's head and nodded firmly. Yes, my daughter. That is enough. That night, in the very Chinese restaurant they had chosen for the engagement dinner, Mr. Daniel Tan's family declared the start of a new war. It was a battle for a family's honor and a fight against a formidable evil that transcended past and present. And at the heart of that war stood a woman on the verge of becoming a mother and a man who had called upon his past self to protect her. The city night deepened and a long, arduous struggle awaited them. The next morning, the world was as peaceful as if nothing had happened. The air was clear from the night's rain, and the leaves outside the window displayed a fresh green. But the air in Mr. Daniel Tan's home was heavy and damp like the night's rain. Mrs. Sharon Tan looked tired, her eyes swollen as if she had spent the night awake. Chloe hadn't emerged from her room. Mr. Tan, too, had barely slept. He had woken up before dawn and sat on the living room sofa, deep in thought. The war had already begun. Early that morning, Senior Inspector Kumar called. As expected, the Lim family had appeared with lawyers from the country's largest law firm, vehemently denying all charges. Jasmine Wong, who had acted in the scheme, had confessed everything, but the Lim family's lawyers were portraying her as a gold digger who, after failing to blackmail the Lim family, was now making false statements and playing the victim. The fixer agency employee had already vanished without a trace. The money Mr. Richard Lim had deposited had passed through several nominee accounts, meaning it would take a considerable amount of time to clearly trace the source of the funds. The law, Mr. Tan realized anew, was always a playing field, tilted in favor of those with money and power. Is Chloe still in her room? Mrs. Sharon Tan asked in a tired voice emerging from the kitchen. She brewed coffee for her husband, her gaze fixed on her daughter's door. Don't wake her. She'll need time to herself. At Mr. Tan's words, Mrs. Sharon Tan sighed. What if she does something drastic? With the baby and all, Chloe is a stronger girl than you think. And she's not alone anymore. She has us. Mr. Tan reassured his wife, but he himself was equally anxious. Last night, Chloe had spoken bravely about fighting, but that resolve could have been born out of a storm of fleeting emotions. The wall of reality was far higher and more formidable than she imagined. What awaited them were messy legal battles, the prejudiced stares of society, and the relentless attacks from the Lim family. Just then, Chloe's door quietly opened. Chloe emerged into the living room, looking no different than usual. Her eyes were a little puffy from crying all night, but her expression was surprisingly calm. She glanced at her father, who was sitting on the sofa, then went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water. Then, with a determined air, she stood before her parents. "Dad, Mom, I'm going to have this baby." The words that came from Chloe's mouth were unexpected. Mr. Daniel Tan and Mrs. Sharon Tan, considering the pain of the breakup and the difficult battle ahead, had been cautiously preparing themselves for the option of giving up the baby. "Chloe, that's a decision you need to think about very carefully. It involves your entire life," Mrs. Sharon Tan said worriedly. "I have thought about it carefully. All night." Chloe gently cupped her belly. "Until yesterday, I resented this child, and he felt like a shackles holding me back. But not anymore. This child is the only person I have to protect. It doesn't matter that he carries the bloodline of that cowardly man and that ugly family. This child is simply my child. I will protect him from all the world's accusations and prejudices." Her voice was resolute. She was no longer the image of a wounded victim. She was the image of a strong mother determined to protect her child. In her eyes, Mr. Daniel Tan saw hope. He was convinced that this child, far from being a wound that would bring Chloe down, would become the strength that would help her rise again. "And I've decided. I'm going to file a paternity and child support lawsuit against Marcus Lim." "What, Chloe, don't get entangled with that horrid family anymore," Mrs. Sharon Tan exclaimed in horror, trying to dissuade her. But Chloe shook her head. "This isn't about money, Mom. I need to legally and socially establish that Marcus Lim is this child's father. No matter how much money and power they use to cover up the truth, I will make it impossible for them to deny this child's very existence. I will make them bear a responsibility they can never forget for the rest of their lives. That is the best revenge I can exact on them." Mr. Daniel Tan was impressed by his daughter's words. Chloe was far wiser and stronger than he had imagined. She had found a way to inflict the greatest damage on her opponents, not through emotional revenge, but through the most rational and legal means. For the Lim family, there would be nothing more dreadful and humiliating than the official recognition that the child in Chloe's womb was of their bloodline. It would be an indelible stain on the family honor they so desperately sought to protect. "That's a good idea," Mr. Tan said with emphasis. "I'll help you. Let's find the best lawyer, someone truly skilled and ethical in this field. But lawyers' fees won't be cheap." Mrs. Sharon Tan voiced a practical concern. "Don't worry, I have some savings. And if necessary, I'll even sell the house. Nothing is more important than my daughter's and grandson's lives." At Mr. Daniel Tan's resolute words, Mrs. Sharon Tan could say no more. She simply watched her husband and daughter, tears welling in her eyes. From that day on, Mr. Daniel Tan returned to his former role as a deputy public prosecutor. He began to mobilize all the connections he had let lie dormant. He contacted old prosecutor colleagues, junior investigators, and even batchmates from law school who were now practicing as lawyers. At first, everyone was surprised by his sudden contact, but upon hearing the circumstances, they all, without exception, expressed anger, as if it were their own problem, and offered to help. In particular, Miss Serene Lim, a batchmate from his law school days who had made a name for herself as a renowned divorce and family law specialist, actively stepped forward. "Daniel, what's happening? I thought you'd finally mellowed out that stubborn temper." Miss Serene Lim's voice over the phone was lighthearted, but after hearing the full story, she became more serious than anyone. "Richard Lim, I've heard that name too. He's a truly malicious individual, notorious, even in legal circles. Don't worry, my friend. This isn't just a child support lawsuit. This is a war to judge a family's arrogance and hypocrisy in the name of the law. I will be your daughter's spear. Don't worry about legal fees. This is a battle I, as a lawyer, must win beyond any financial considerations." Miss Serene Lim's involvement was like gaining an army. She immediately began preparing for the lawsuit. Meanwhile, the police investigation led by Senior Inspector Kumar was also making gradual progress. While there was no definitive evidence, yet suspicious activities were slowly being discovered as they tracked the flow of funds within Mr. Richard Lim's company. It was becoming apparent that the engagement incident was merely the tip of the iceberg, and a much larger and uglier crime might be hidden beneath the surface. Mr. Richard Lim, however, was not idle. They hired the country's top public relations firm and initiated a media campaign. Provocative articles with titles like "Chable Heir Targeted by Gold Digger" and "Woman Demands Huge Sum Under Pretext of Marriage" began appearing on internet news sites and various online communities. Chloe's identity was subtly veiled, but the content was specific enough for anyone who knew her to easily guess who it was about. They were attempting to portray Chloe as an unscrupulous woman, and themselves as victims trying to garner public sympathy. Chloe watched it all calmly. In the past, she would have been sleepless with a sense of injustice and rage, but now it was different. She calmly prepared counter-arguments with Miss Serene Lim. Past messages exchanged with Marcus photos they had taken together records of meetings with his friends, all served as evidence to prove the sincerity of their relationship and the true nature of the incident. One evening, a mysterious package was delivered to Mr. Daniel Tan's home. There was no sender's name. Cautiously, he opened the box to find an old USB drive and a short note. To former DPP Daniel Tan. The truth you sought is within this. Please this time bring him down. An anonymous whistleblower. Mr. Tan's heart began to pound violently. With trembling hands, he plugged the USB into his laptop. Inside were countless files detailing Mr. Richard Lim's slush funds, a list of political lobbying activities, and the full scope of his stock manipulation. These were the crucial pieces of evidence he had searched for so desperately 10 years ago, but had never managed to obtain. Who had sent it? Was it someone who held a grudge against Miss Richard Lim, or a former associate who had wished for Mr. Tan's return? It didn't matter. What mattered was that the balance of power had now completely shifted to him. This was not merely an opportunity to restore Chloe's honor, but a golden chance to eradicate the colossal evil that was Mr. Richard Lim. Mr. Tan clutched the USB drive tightly, gazing into the darkness outside the window. His eyes gleamed colder and sharper than ever before. The prelude to a long and arduous battle was over, and the curtain was now rising on the main act of war. The appearance of the USB drive was like pouring oil on a flickering flame. Miss Daniel Tan stayed up all night analyzing the files contained within. The contents were beyond imagination. Mr. Richard Lim's empire was not a castle built on sand, but one erected on a colossal bedrock of slush funds, stained with the blood and tears of countless people and illicit dealings. The files were not just simple accounting ledgers. They were a horrifying chronicle detailing how Mr. Richard Lim had operated above the law for the past 2 decades. Within the files, there were several encrypted folders. Mr. Tan utilized his past investigative experience to begin cracking the codes. After several days and nights of struggle, the deepest hidden folder finally opened. And within it, he discovered an unexpected name, Minister David Chiang, a prominent figure in the current ruling party, and even being considered a candidate for the next prime minister. The files meticulously documented how a significant portion of Mr. Richard Lim's slush funds had flowed to Minister David Chiang over several years. This was not merely political donations. It was clearly bribery, and in exchange Mr. Lim had received various business favors and the quashing of tax investigations. Mr. Tan felt a chill run down his spine. The opponent in this battle was not merely a wealthy corporate magnate. Behind him stood a formidable political power. When he contacted Senior Inspector Kumar to inform him of this fact, Senior Inspector Kumar on the other end of the line was speechless for a long moment. "Senior, this is a level we cannot handle. Minister David Chiang is a figure even the Commissioner of Police wouldn't dare to touch carelessly. If we rush into this, something might happen to you or your daughter." Senior Inspector Kumar's concerns were very real. Mr. Daniel Tan was well aware of that fact, but he could not back down. He had already drawn his sword, and this sword had to cut through not just Mr. Richard Lim, but every link in the chain of corruption connected to him. "Inspector Kumar, I can't do this alone. I need your help. Senior, this isn't just about revenge. This is about upholding justice. It's the very thing we swore to do when we first put on our police and prosecutor uniforms, remember. Have you forgotten?" Senior Inspector Kumar, moved by Mr. Tan's heartfelt words, finally nodded. He was not alone. Around him, there were still comrades who believed in justice and followed it. Meanwhile, the date for the first hearing of Chloe's child support lawsuit was set. Miss Serene Lim meticulously prepared for the trial. Her strategy was clear. She intended not to let this trial end merely as an individual's domestic case, but to publicly highlight the Lim family's immorality and character flaws. To achieve this, she began to actively utilize the media. She contacted several reputable news agencies and started publishing counter-articles to challenge the Lim family's public relations campaign. Exclusive Tycoon's engagement scandal. The truth revealed victims' tearful interview, fabricated evidence, and false acts. Who is trying to hide the truth? As the articles were published, public opinion slowly began to shift. The comments that had initially branded Chloe a gold digger decreased, and voices questioning the truth of the incident grew louder. In particular, Chloe's written interview with the media, in which she did not reveal her real name but calmly and logically explained the full story and her feelings, caused a significant stir. Most importantly, her admission of premarital pregnancy and her firm resolve to take full responsibility and raise the child alone garnered widespread sympathy and support. As the situation turned unfavorable, Mr. Richard Lim began to grow anxious. They sent representatives to Mr. Daniel Tan to propose a settlement. At first, they attempted to appease him with a substantial amount of money. They offered a prime apartment in a prestigious district and a lifetime's worth of funds on the condition that he withdraw the lawsuit and Chloe quietly give birth and live her life. Of course, they stipulated that the child could not be registered under the Lim family name. Mr. Daniel Tan flatly refused the offer. "Are you trying to buy my daughter's and grandson's lives with money? Go back and tell Richard Lim that I want his sincere apology and the judgment of the law, not money." When persuasion failed, their tactics quickly shifted to intimidation. Unfamiliar men began to loiter around their home, and at night, anonymous calls with insults and threats came in. When Chloe went out, a black car would sometimes follow her. They intended to terrorize Mr. Daniel Tan and his family into abandoning the fight. However, their threats only further ignited the fighting spirit of Mr. Tan's family. Mr. Tan, with the help of Senior Inspector Kumar, requested police protection, and Mrs. Sharon Tan and Chloe rarely left the house. The home became like a fortress, cut off from the outside world, but within it, the three of them relied on each other and grew even stronger. Chloe was afraid, but she steeled herself thinking of the child in her womb. She talked to her baby every day. "Baby, the world is a little scary and tough, isn't it? But don't worry, Mommy and Grandpa will definitely protect you. Just be born healthy without any worries." Mr. Daniel Tan deliberated on how to release the data contained in the USB drive. Handing it over to the police or the public prosecutor's office was risky. There was a high possibility the investigation would be stifled by Minister David Cheung's influence. Leaking it to the media was the most effective approach, but the challenge was finding a reliable media outlet. Most major news organizations were already beholden to conglomerates and political powers. Then, a person came to his mind. In his past, during his tenure as a deputy public prosecutor, there was an investigative journalist who relentlessly pursued corruption in power. He had since left the major news outlets and was now running a small independent online news platform with a few colleagues. He was a true journalist, free from the external pressures of money and power, pursuing only the truth. Mr. Daniel Tan, after some searching, managed to contact the journalist. At their meeting, Mr. Tan informed him of the USB drive's existence. The journalist's eyes gleamed. He instinctively realized that this was an enormous scoop that would shake the world. "Are you really going to give me this data? This is too big a case for a small news outlet like ours to handle." "That's precisely why I came to you," Mr. Tan said. "Large news organizations can't handle this data. They have too much to lose. But you have nothing to lose except your passion for reporting the truth. You are the only one who can make this data public." The journalist pondered for a long time. This was a dangerous gamble that could cost him his career, perhaps even his life. But he couldn't suppress the burning journalistic spirit welling up within his chest. "Understood. I'll do it. Mr. Daniel Tan and the journalist shook hands firmly. All preparations were now complete. They planned to detonate a massive bomb on the day of Chloe's trial. Inside the courtroom, Miss Serene Lim would judge the Lim family in the name of the law, and outside the courtroom, the media would expose the corrupt connection between Mr. Richard Lim and Minister David Cheung to the entire world. The day of reckoning was fast approaching. Mr. Daniel Tan gazed out the window and took a deep breath. The faint end of a long dark tunnel was beginning to appear. No one knew whether brilliance or an even deeper darkness awaited him at that end, but he had to go on, because it was his destiny and the only way to be a proud father to his daughter and grandfather to his grandchild. On the day of the trial, the area in front of the courthouse was swarming with reporters from early morning. The level of interest was unbelievable for what was ostensibly a simple family court case. The information deliberately leaked by Miss Serene Lim and the investigative journalist had been enough to whet the media's appetite. The subtle hint that truth beyond the scandal of a tycoon would be revealed fueled a fierce competition among reporters. The Lim family entered the courthouse with grim expressions. Numerous camera flashes erupted, but they remained silent, their lips tightly sealed. Behind them, a phalanx of lawyers from the country's largest law firm formed a human shield. Their appearance was less like defendants coming to face justice and more like generals going into battle. Marcus kept his head bowed low, anxious to avoid people's gazes. His face was filled with shame and fear. A moment later, Chloe appeared accompanied by her father, Mr. Daniel Tan, and mother, Mrs. Sharon Tan. Chloe did not avoid the public's gaze. She looked straight ahead. Carefully cradling her noticeably swollen belly, she walked with dignity. Her eyes were no longer those of a wounded victim. They were the eyes of a warrior, fighting to claim her rights and protect her child's future. Reporters swarmed around them, bombarding her with questions, but Chloe remained silent, walking steadfastly. She intended to say what she needed to say inside the courtroom. The courtroom was filled with a palpable tension. The public gallery was packed with representatives from both sides and numerous journalists. The judge entered and the trial began. First, the plaintiff's side, Chloe's legal team, presented their arguments. Miss Serene Lim, in a calm yet powerful voice, outlined the case. She meticulously described the couple's meeting their love and the progression to pregnancy, emphasizing that this was by no means a casual relationship. Then she began to specifically recount the events that unfolded on the day of the engagement dinner. The Lim family's insulting remarks, the sudden appearance of the mysterious woman Jasmine, and the fabricated evidence she had presented. Miss Serene Lim submitted Jasmine Wong's police statement, which contained her confession as evidence. Your Honor, the essence of this case is not a mere dispute between a man and a woman. The defendants, leveraging their social standing and financial power, attempted to trample on a woman's dignity and even deny the child in her womb. This is a clear violation of human rights and a deplorable abuse of power by the socially privileged. The Lim family's defense team immediately launched a rebuttal against Miss Serene Lim's sharp arguments. They claimed that Jasmine Wong's testimony lacked credibility and that she was lying for financial gain. Furthermore, they asserted that the relationship between Marcus and Chloe was merely a one-sided claim by Chloe, and that Marcus had never considered the relationship serious enough for marriage. The plaintiff's side is appealing to emotion and obscuring the true nature of the case, while the defendant, Marcus Lim, acknowledges moral responsibility for youthful indiscretions. He denies having planned or participated in any malicious acts as alleged by the plaintiff. Everything is a fabrication concocted by the plaintiff and the witness, Jasmine Wong. The fierce debate between both sides escalated. At that moment, Miss Serene Lim presented a crucial piece of evidence. It was a recorded phone call between the Fixer Agency employee and Mr. Richard Lim's secretary. The Fixer Agency employee who had vanished was eventually tracked down by Senior Inspector Kumar and his team after persistent efforts and was persuaded and pressured into providing the recording. The recording contained vivid details of the entire process, planning the engagement charade, recruiting Jasmine Wong, and delivering the script. These are Chairman Lim's instructions. Make it as natural as possible, but ensure they completely throw in the towel. Don't worry about the money. If it succeeds, you'll receive double the agreed amount. As the recording reverberated through the courtroom, the public gallery buzzed with murmurs. Mr. Richard Lim's face flushed crimson with rage, and his defense team could not conceal their dismay. In the face of undeniable evidence, all their excuses lost their power. The judge called Marcus to the witness stand. The judge questioned him about the truth of the events at the engagement dinner. Marcus sweated profusely, his eyes darting towards his father and the defense lawyers. It was another life-altering moment of choice. He could have chosen to lie again and retreat cowardly, but then his eyes met Chloe's. The moment he saw her, gaze filled not with resentment or contempt, but with deep sorrow and pity. Something within him broke. It's true. Marcus's soft single sentence astonished everyone in the courtroom. My father planned everything. I was scared. Scared of my father, so I couldn't object. I am truly sorry to Chloe and to the baby in her womb. He broke down sobbing, collapsing in the witness stand. At his son's unexpected confession, Richard Lim leaped to his feet and roared, "That crazy boy! What is he saying?" His shouts were quickly subdued by the court officers. It was the moment everything ended. The castle of lies built by the Lim family was crumbling disastrously at the hands of their own son. At that very moment outside the courthouse, another bomb was exploding. Based on the data provided by Mr. Daniel Tan, an article began to appear on the website of the investigative journalist's online news platform. Exclusive JKL Holdings chairman Richard Lim accused of multi-million-dollar slush fund, billions in bribes to Minister David Chung uncovered. The article instantly dominated the main pages of all major portal sites. Attached to the article were Mr. Richard Lim's slush fund ledgers, details of bribe transactions, and concrete evidence proving his corrupt connection with Minister David Chung. The repercussions were unimaginable. The entire nation of Singapore was turned upside down. The public prosecutor's office, spurred by public opinion, immediately formed a special investigation team, and Mr. Richard Lim and Minister David Chiang were issued travel bans. As Mr. Richard Lim emerged from the trial, he was no longer faced by reporters covering a domestic case, but by a throng of journalists investigating his criminal activities. Amidst the flashing cameras and barrage of questions, he was gripped by a sense of helplessness and despair he had never experienced in his life. Everything he had dedicated his life to building was crumbling in an instant. In contrast, when Chloe and Mr. Daniel Tan's family left the courthouse, the gazes directed at them had changed. Eyes of sympathy, support, and respect poured onto them. Chloe was no longer the subject of a scandal, but a hero who had fought against a colossal injustice and won. In the car ride home, the radio was filled with news solely about Mr. Richard Lim and Minister David Chung. Mrs. Sharon Tan shed tears of joy, and Mr. Daniel Tan quietly gazed out the window. His face held the relief of someone who had completed a long-standing task. Chloe gently stroked her belly. The baby kicked vigorously as if in joy. She whispered to her child, "It's all over, baby. Only good things will happen to us from now on." It was a whisper of hope and a promise of a new beginning. The long and arduous battle was over, but ahead of them now lay a new life to build with the child in her womb. That path might be even harder and lonelier than before, but they now knew that they could overcome any challenge together. Under the name of family, they had become the strongest team in the world. The world remained abuzz with the scandal involving Mr. Richard Lim and Minister David Chung for days. As the public prosecutor's investigation officially began, their ugly corruption was peeled back like layers of an onion. Mr. Richard Lim was eventually arrested and detained, and JKL Holdings, the empire he had built over a lifetime, faced dissolution as it transitioned to a professional management system. Minister David Chung, too, resigned from all party positions and announced his retirement from politics, but he could not escape the judgment of the law. It was truly a scene reminiscent of the end of an era. Chloe's trial, which had been the starting point of all these events, concluded anticlimactically. Marcus had confessed to all facts, and with Mr. Richard Lim's criminal activities exposed to the entire world, there was no longer any room for dispute. The court accepted all of Chloe's claims, acknowledging the child in her womb as Marcus Lim's biological son, and ordering the payment of past and future child support. The amount was set at an unusually high level, a result that included a punitive element for the Lim family's immoral actions. Everything seemed to be falling into place. However, Mr. Daniel Tan's family still had one unresolved issue: Marcus Lim. He visited Mr. Daniel Tan's home after all the trials had concluded. His pale face and crumpled clothes, as if he hadn't changed them for days, bore no resemblance to the sophisticated scion he once was. He knelt at the front door and tearfully apologized to Chloe and her parents. I have committed a truly unforgivable sin. I will atone for it for the rest of my life to Chloe and to the baby. Please give me just one more chance." Mrs. Sharon Tan seemed to soften at his appearance, but Mr. Daniel Tan remained stern. Chloe merely looked down at him, saying nothing. "Your apology is for Chloe to accept, but you must understand, this forgiveness does not make your sin disappear. It is simply the mercy Chloe extends to herself so that she can overcome her pain and move forward." At Miss Tan's words, Marcus wept even more bitterly. Chloe approached him and said in a cold voice, "Get up. Your kneeling changes nothing. You are legally this child's father, and you have a duty to provide support. Just fulfill that faithfully. I don't ask for anything more. Please do not interfere in my child's life or mine anymore. That is the only atonement you can give us." At Chloe's resolute words, Marcus eventually dropped his head and had no choice but to turn away. As she watched his retreating back, Chloe finally felt that the long, twisted thread of their unfortunate connection had been completely severed. A few months later, Chloe gave birth to a healthy son. Strangely, the baby resembled Chloe and her father, Mr. Daniel Tan, more than Marcus. As the baby's cries filled the house, the heavy atmosphere that had long weighed on the family finally seemed to lift. Mr. Daniel Tan was as happy as if he possessed the entire world, unable to take his eyes off his grandson. Chloe strived to be a good mother. There were days when she cried exhausted by the weight of raising a child alone, but she never weakened. Every laugh, every small gesture of her child became her reason for living and her strength. She resumed her studies, picking up her abandoned design major, slowly preparing to stand on her own in the world under her own name. Mr. Daniel Tan resigned from his company. Through this ordeal, he realized he no longer wanted to live for money. He founded a non-governmental organization, Voices of Justice, using his experience and legal knowledge to help people who had been unjustly wronged. The former deputy public prosecutor had now become a beacon illuminating the hidden corners of society. Old colleagues, including Senior Inspector Kumar, joined him. Years passed and Chloe's son celebrated his first birthday. A small but joyful first birthday party was held. The child, during the traditional Doljabi ceremony, unhesitatingly picked up a book. Everyone smiled brightly at the sight. Mr. Daniel Tan held his grown grandson and looked out the window. Warm sunlight poured in from outside. Just then, Chloe approached her father and said, "Dad, thank you. Because of you, I and our baby can smile like this." "No, I should thank you, my dear. Because of you, I was able to find something precious I had lost." The two exchanged silent smiles. That terrible engagement dinner, which had shaken their lives to the core, was now a distant memory. The storm had passed, and the ground beneath them had become firmer. Scars remained, but over those scars, new shoots of hope were blossoming. After the birthday party, as she looked at her son soundly asleep, Chloe quietly wrote in her diary, "My dear baby, instead of painful scars, I will pass on strength and wisdom to you as your mother. Your beginning was a little special, but I believe that beginning will make you a stronger and warmer person. I will be your strongest shield, so that no prejudice in the world can diminish your worth. I love you, my son." A tear fell onto her diary, but it was no longer a tear of sorrow. It was a warm tear filled with gratitude, happiness, and hope for the future. Her second act of life had just begun. Time flowed like a river, leaving scars over wounds. And then new flesh grew over those scars. On a certain autumn afternoon, when the memory of the terrible engagement dinner felt like a distant nightmare, Chloe sat on a park bench sketching in her notebook. Beside her, her 5-year-old son Ethan chased pigeons, his joyful laughter echoing in her ears, like the most beautiful music in the world. She was now a recognized furniture designer in Singapore. She had fought against society's prejudice. As a single mother raised her child, studied late into the night, entered design competitions, and risen through her own efforts. Her designs were praised for their warm human perspective and deep understanding of life. Such insight and understanding could only be possessed by someone who had traversed a period of intense pain. "Mom, Grandpa's here," Ethan shouted, pointing to the park entrance. There stood Mr. Daniel Tan and his wife Mrs. Sharon Tan, waving with kind smiles. Mr. Daniel Tan was now a respected social activist, leading the citizens' advocacy group, Voices of Justice. His efforts to expose the corruption of powerful entities and stand up for the socially vulnerable shone even brighter than his past days as a deputy public prosecutor. He lifted his grandson high in the air. Ethan's laughter filled the park. The Lim family was almost forgotten from the world's memory. Mr. Richard Lim was released on medical bail after a long imprisonment, but he had lost everything. Marcus Lim regularly sent child support, but Chloe did not allow him to appear before their son. She occasionally heard that he would watch their son from a distance before leaving, but Chloe's heart was no longer swayed. He had his own burden of regret and atonement to bear. The three people sat side by side on the bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues. Sharing warm sandwiches prepared by Mrs. Sharon Tan, they savored their ordinary yet infinitely precious happiness. "Ethan, do you know who the coolest person in the world is?" Mr. Daniel Tan asked. Ethan pondered for a moment, then hugged Chloe tightly and shouted, "My mommy." Everyone burst into bright laughter at his answer. Chloe kissed her son's forehead. The ordeal had taken much from her, but it had left her with something far more precious: the true meaning of family, the ability to stand on her own strength, and the warmth of a small life that was beyond compare. She could now be certain that her choice on that day had been the right one. Like a tree rooted more deeply after a storm, her family had grown strong enough to withstand any tempest the world might throw at them. Their faces, bathed in the sunset glow, were filled with serenity and gratitude. Thus, their true lives were finally shining brilliantly.